welcome everyone. Those who joined later, we're recording this session. If that's going to be any issue or anything that gets said that you don't want to be, recorded, we can always edit that out. So don't feel you need to hold back in our conversations. We've got a really full day, a really full session with three incredible speakers that we'll pass over to start the conversation going in just a minute. What I wanted to do was just share where the hub is right now. And we did an incredible session with Tim on Wednesday. Tim Collins is on the call, with a number of the members. And really, we tried to get to the essence of what the hub's been doing for the last year and a half and where it's going to be going. So I was hoping Anthony, as the leader of Symphony 7, the one that's really been able to support this hub in all this time, I think he could maybe do a bit of an update where we got to and what people can expect coming up.
Yeah, sure, 100%, and thanks for that, Vlad. I like you. I want to thank Tim. Tim, where are you? Have you actually started a walk?
No, he said he's eating. He's going to turn his camera on in a minute.
Okay. Tim, I hope that's Vegemite on the sandwich, mate. I really just wanted to thank you for the session on Wednesday. Tim Collins has an inimitable talent. He not only consults to a lot of senior execs and non-exec directors around what to think about and then what to do in terms of lowering their carbon footprint and leading into a new future, but he also has a really good talent for helping groups to get really organized around purpose, values, measures of success. And we were fortunate enough to actually have Tim lead such a session on Wednesday, and it was a really fruitful session. There's people in the room here today who were in the session. I personally felt that we re-energized, we regrouped, we refocused, and I now feel we're a lot better directed. And we thought for this morning, we would just share two main things. One is the purpose, the other is the values of the hub. And then also we've acted really quickly since Wednesday. One of the suggestions was that we start to actually have an update with some metrics, and we've got those metrics already here today. So Maurice, I wonder, can we share screen so that people can follow as we go?
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Maurice, I wonder, can you give my throat a moment to recover by just confirming to everyone what the purpose is of the group as discovered by the group itself?
Absolutely, happy to do that. So yeah, through the discussions and I guess an exploration of what our needs are as members of the group and the members of the world, what we came to was really a way to, as a group, build scalable models. And I'm not just going to read the purpose out, but talk a little bit to it. Build scalable models by first focusing on a specific industry or specific system that we can disrupt and redesign, and through that allow other industries or other systems to replicate that. We're going to be doing that, of course, through building this cohesive community. So that's really to the purpose of the group is disrupting and redesigning the industries and helping others do the same. How's your throat, Anthony?
I think good. We'll see what happens when I say a few words. Thanks, Maurice.
So the next piece we covered was the values. So, how do we roll around here? And Anthony, I might let you speak to it because they're also sort of in the membrane of the Symphony 7 values as a whole.
100%, thank you. And love the word membrane. That's another Tim Collins word. So really, what is the environment in which we operate? And how can any member of the group confidently make a decision knowing that his or her actions are aligned with the way we roll around here in the group? The first one, top left, is really central to what we're doing, and it's the value of mutuality. And mutuality really says that that all boats must rise. So if Julie, for instance, gives a huge amount of support to roles and really helps roles do a whole lot of things, that's very generous of Julie. And if Julie does that, maybe Roll's boat goes up and Julie's boat either goes up a little bit or goes down. That would be just generosity. But if Julie and Roll's work out a way where they can support each other and both boats go up, that then is mutuality. So we want to make sure that everything that we do in the community is based on mutuality, because that's what will make the journey of the hub sustainable.
Amen.
Really,
amen to that.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that, because we feel very strongly about that. And we know that that's how real win-win occurs. It's great to think about being generous, but sometimes generosity can lead to our own boat going down. If that happens, we can't sustain the journey. Next one was equality and equity. Definitely we believe that every woman, man and child deserves the right to lead a life, a joyful life in harmony with the planet. And the converse also applies. We believe that people who see the world as their oyster and who want to become exceedingly wealthy using an extraction method that treats everyone else as their servants, those people do not belong in this hub or in the Symphony 7 community. Syntropy. Has anyone ever heard of this word before? Can I see by a show of hands? Okay. Samuel, I think it's probably a recently made up word, because when I Googled it, there weren't a lot of entries. What's your definition of syntropy?
Syntropy, I think it's actually, there is actually someone who coined it here in Australia who talks to this notion of syntropy. But I mean, syntropy, and you could almost, it's tangential, but not the same as, what's the other sin word? Anyway, it's essentially looking at ways in which we can, I see it in a very regenerative framework, right? So syntropy is adding value to a system that benefits as many people within the system. And so when you think of something as having a syntropic force, it's you know, life creates conditions conducive to life, and that is us as life forms seeking out and creating syntropic winds. So that's sort of the way that I would approach it.
So make it all better and be the opposite of the extraction model that seeks to extract as much as possible without replenishing.
Leave things better than what you left them with.
100%. Thanks for that, Murray. And then finally, challenge the status quo. We're more than willing to challenge existing systems, specifically to help us get off the current dangerous trajectory that we're on in terms of the environment. And we must be willing to lean in to do things differently and to play a leadership role if we're to get to where we need to go, not just for our sake, but for our kids, their kids, and the next 50 generations. So those are the core values. Of course, there's a number of other things, but these are the main values by which we guide ourselves within this particular group. Maurice.
Right. So the last question we explored on Wednesday was, what are we actually aiming to create? How are we going to do this? How are we going to achieve our purpose? And a lot of sticky notes, essentially, a lot of ideas got thrown out, and by reviewing it and looking at them, sort of grouped them into 3 areas that I felt started actually supporting each other, hence this little circular model. And I guess it starts because the net zero landscape, really any of the problems that we're addressing around climate change, are extremely complex, and not one person or one business or one stakeholder is going to be able to solve it on their own. So bringing together the various players in the field to connect with each other is really important. And what that quickly lends to and leads to is actually sharing what's already happening. What am I doing? What are you doing? How can I learn from you?
You're a truck driver with a valid ABN. Apply to become a Shell card holder and receive.
Sorry. Oh man.
I'm muting you now.
Gonna have to edit that out now.
That's great. Just some subtle marketing. Can't escape.
Yeah. So the second part being really raising awareness of what's happening, why it's happening, understanding the landscape, and sessions like this today with great 3 speakers we have are really lending to that and having a dialogue and discussion, which then creates the opportunity and the last bit to figure out, okay, if this is what's going on, how do we collaborate on the projects that are already happening? Or if there's a new problem we've identified, how do we launch a project? How do we do something? So I grouped those, and there's more details in that. And once I did that, I went, well, and I guess the second part of what we did around this was, how do we actually measure that? So it's about a dozen metrics we put on the board. And when I put this together, I started looking at, okay, what have we already done in the last 2 and some years in the community, and I actually found some really good pieces of information around that. So we've got a growing community. There's actually been 303 stakeholders within the Symphony 7 community and the broader group. 28 solutions, or 28 people have come to speak about a specific approach aspect. There might have very well been more solutions discussed in the individual presentations, and over 30 collaborations that formed. So people that connected here started working together, and that really also spans sort of everything from carbon sequestration to circular economy to stranded assets. There's a whole range of things, and I know there's people in the room today here who are currently working on things, and hopefully later in the session when we get to the conversation piece can bring out some of those projects that are happening and talk to those as well. So that's really what we're aiming to create here in this group, and what we can expect more of.
Maurice, I know we're close to time up, but before we do hand over, I wonder, it might be worth just highlighting that, in fact, within a group, it doesn't have to be an enormous group. Within a reasonably cohesive, tight, small group, anything is possible. And we know that to be true because, Vlad, it's through this hub, actually, that you met Matt Marsh and Tawab from Und. And absolutely. I know that from there came an idea, and from the idea came a vision. And the vision led to the creation of a business, which has now secured an enormous amount of funding, both private and government, to go after recycling used tires, prove the point in Australia, and then migrate the technology into China and other countries. And that all came from this hub and from Vlad and others collaborating. I know that I know Robin Vessier is a master collaborator. I know James Mcgregor, you're a master collaborator. In fact, I'd be leaving everybody out if I didn't name everyone. I won't do that for the sake of time, but I'm inspired by what the group has already done, and I'm in excited anticipation around what's possible as we continue the journey.
And just I'd say, just before Julie, I see your hand up, I was actually going to call out Julie as well, that through the work that we've done, I mean, how many projects have we looked at, Julie? At least 3. You know, we've had Julie does some incredible work on the boards, but you know, to a point even to that technology that was supposed to change energy globally. You know, it's like, who knows where that's going to go? But that was some crazy stuff out there.
Still working on that one.
Yeah, that's right.
But
did you have,
yeah, Vlad, I just wanted to say, like, we only had this second session with Tim Collins on Wednesday, and I just want to say well done, brilliant work to Maurice and Anthony to actually turn that around to get it to this in 2 days. So that is excellent, guys.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to give all the credit to Maurice because that's the truth.
Yeah, it's incredible that you say, and thanks to Maurice and Anthony for presenting this, because it's, you know, from the very beginning, you know, we have talked about the impact that we want to achieve and how we want to track it. And, you know, I think that just sometimes, you know, a group just needs time to run and to see what works and what doesn't. And I think we've had some really interesting iterations. You know, a year where we're growing, we had like 40 plus people sometimes on a call, through to earlier this year where we're very focusing on, okay, what do the members need? And so coming this full circle around these metrics and around the ideas that came out of that session, run so absolutely professionally and incredibly by Tim, suddenly we realized that, well, there are certain things that we must hit and we've got to expand, and we've got to, you know, even if you just look at one of those things around the stakeholders, there are stakeholders and there are people from different stakeholder type of groups. And I'm sure this is going to come out in our session today. And these metrics are just so relevant and a great segue into the conversation that we're about to kick off. So Maurice, thank you so much. Anthony, thanks for that. And Tim, wow, just again, we're all still processing everything that we were able to achieve in your session that you ran for us. So thank you. Let's dive in. We've got this session specifically focused on innovation, bringing things to market. We've got three incredible individuals. I know two of them very well. One I know extremely well, and so I might start with those that I know well and work my way down the list. So Sam, I will introduce you last. I hope you don't mind, but that gives you an opportunity to say something about yourself as well, a little bit more, and maybe Maurice can top and tail my intro. So let's start with James Mcgregor. So James Mcgregor is someone I've known for a while now, and actually met here at the Symphony 7 events. And he's an extraordinary individual with over a decade of experience in commercializing things out of CSIRO, right? So we talk about what is the pinnacle agency in the country. Well, CSIRO is incredible in its ability to develop technologies, and the government's focus on, funding research and innovation. But James specifically is passionate about getting shit done and actually taking it to market and making it work, not just research for research's sake. And hence why when he left CSIRO, he started a business called Blue Tribe. And I've just got a couple of points here that I want to make sure I don't miss. So that business, Blue Tribe, is a multi-award winning. And in fact, in the last 6 months, James, how many awards have you won? I mean, I've lost count. It's just like every other week on LinkedIn, you're talking about some award that you're up for. So, and it's all around the innovation. It's all about shifting behavior of people, which is what is, I think, James and the Blue Tribe specialty. And I want to call out that James works with myself, Jennifer, Raja, who you met before, and Tawab in the Net Zero Stack. So, and that is a group that we've formed together to be able to try and scale some of all these different relationships that we have to actually make a big impact. So, James, thank you so much. Incredible reputation. We're so lucky to have you. Hamed is here. So Hamed, I've met, he's not just working in an engineering business, also a multi-award winning organization, but they fabricate. And I think this is what's really unique, is that when we see people who need to bring things to market, you need the design, you need the engineering, you need to be able to actually fabricate the work. And so Hamed is the managing director of Krenak, which is a team of top quality developers, designers, and engineers that actually work specifically with entrepreneurs and startups. And they also help a significant number of established businesses to actually bring their things to market. And last but not least, Sam is somebody I've only met very recently, and we're really lucky to have you. And you work in a space that I love, and and you've worked with a company called The Great Wrap, which Maurice and Anthony knows. Look, I'm obsessed with organic waste into plastic alternatives. It's just one of those futures that's going to happen, or must happen even more so. And so Sam's the co-founder of Collabs. And, he works, from what I understand here in my notes, very much in that space of taking biotech companies, to go through that research, design, and innovation stage. But you work in a whole range of other companies as well. So I've got here Great Wrap Plastic, PLSTC. And it says here that you are a fun guy. Oh, no, wait, you work with Fun Guy Solutions. Sorry, mate. It's okay. I had to throw in that joke. It's like the fun guy. My kids love it. Anyway, so welcome. Thank you so much. What we're going to do is we're just going to pass to individually, just for a short, conversation. You're back, some examples, get the conversation going. We'll run through all three, and then we'll open up as a panel discussion and bring it to the team, for a much broader conversation. Shall we start with James? James, are you ready to roll?
Yep, we're good. Yeah. Do you want me to just start talking?
Go for it. Do you need anything? Do you need to share screen or anything? Maurice will give you...
No, I was told no slides, so I'm just going to talk.
No slides.
So I followed instructions this time. So yes, yeah. I mean, the topic of today is why don't so many good ideas don't see the light of day. Actually, in many ways, Vlad mentioned before, I worked at CSIRO for 13 odd years. And one of the reasons I left was because a lot of those great ideas I was working on got to a point and didn't go out there. And I used to get so frustrated that all this great research wasn't getting commercialized and people were getting access to it. And I wasn't getting turned into, products and businesses. And then I had one of those dangerous thoughts that get you in a lot of trouble, is going, someone should do something about this. And I was like, well, what? Well, maybe I can do something about that. And it's got me in a bit of trouble. That's how I ended up here today. And so I guess over that time, I think sustainable solutions should be held to the same standard in terms of business terms as any other business, right? And for me, there are 4 key ingredients that every business needs to have in order for it to be successful, or every product or every service. That it needs to have a customer who has a problem, that problem is painful enough that they're willing to pay to fix. You have to have a solution that solves that problem, and you have to have a business model that delivers value and captures value. And I think for sustainable products and services, they have all those 4 key ingredients. The only difference is that the solution also delivers some sustainability outcome or some impact outcome, or the business model facilitates delivering that sort of outcome. And so we do work with, and we use the same process for every market segment we work in, but we do a lot of work with government departments, helping them develop programs around trying to achieve market change. We work with businesses who are trying to either implement sustainability strategies or develop new product lines, and we work with startups. And consistently, they make the same mistake over and over again. It's the same thing we see every single time. And of those 4 ingredients, the most important one for a sustainability-related solution in trying to get your idea and make it successful is the problem. All right, and every time, and I feel like a broken record on when we have these initial meetings with clients, is that people who work in the sustainability space are really passionate about what they do. They want to change the world, and they think that everyone thinks the same way as they do. All right, and they don't. All right, so they think that the mission's enough. Like, I'm trying to save the oceans. I'm trying to save the planet. I'm trying to save this, and they think that that is enough on its own for someone to buy their product and service, and it's not. Right, that's simply not true, because there is no one, with the exception of the people on this call, who is waking up this morning going, gee, I really need to deal with that waste plastic in the ocean problem. That's really bugging me, right? There's no one that's waking up and doing that, except maybe a tiny percentage of the population. So if you're trying to position your solution and trying to scale up your solution by saying, we're trying to save the world, it's just like chasing a parked car, right? The harder you run, the more it's going to hurt. Now, I want to give you an example, right? So here's my virtual thing's going to make this up. So here's a plastic cup, right? So let's just assume, for example, that my passion is to get plastic out of the ocean and turn it into cups that I sell into people's homes. And I go out there into the market and say, hey, you want to help me save the ocean, right? The people that are going to hear that message are a tiny percentage of the population, right? So all of a sudden my impact is restricted to those people who are really passionate about saving the ocean. So I'm just going to do an exercise, and this could go really badly, but in the chat, I want people to think about this glass or this cup. What other things or what jobs can I actually do with this cup, besides the obvious of holding liquid in it to drink? Just chuck some ideas in the chat. So plant a plant, yep. That must have been, yeah. Sandcastle, sandcastle gin. I haven't had that one before. Hold pens, trophies, hold some flowers, yep. An old phone. Oh yeah, with the string, yeah, I'm with you, lad. Get 10 and do bowling. Great, awesome. All right, so there are a whole heap of jobs that I can do with this particular one. Now, the one that hasn't come up, which I was hoping is going to come up because that's what I prepared my example for, but I'm just going to throw it in there now, is catching spiders. All right, so hands up. Who's had a pot spider in their home they've had to get out once before? Right, pretty much everyone. All right. So the market for spider catchers is everyone on this call, right? So now the market for someone who wants to save the ocean might be one person on this call. The market for spider catchers is everyone. So I'm going to introduce you to a product, right? Meet the Spider Catcher Mark V, all right? It's made from a solid plastic. It can catch medium-sized spiders. Fangs can't go through the plastic, so you can pick them quite easily. With a cheap bit of paper, you can slide underneath and carry the spider outside, right? So my market size is now infinitely bigger than it was before when I'm trying to sell you the idea of the mission of saving the oceans. But this glass is made from plastic from the ocean, all right? So the more of them I sell, the more impact that I deliver. And so getting the problem right, I think, is the most essential ingredient of any sustainable business or product or service. And understanding the person who's paying you for it, you know, what is it that's going to motivate them to buy into your idea? And that, for me, that's like, if you're going to do one thing and take one thing away from today, that is the thing that you need to get right. If you get that wrong, it doesn't matter how good your product or service is, no one's going to buy it, because people will only use your product or service. And the more people that use your product or service, the more impact you deliver. They will only ever use it if you are solving a problem that is painful enough that they're willing to pay for right now and take action. And so, yeah, for me, we talk about why things don't get to market. The number one reason is that sustainability people sell the wrong problem, or they're solving the wrong problem, right? And they're marketing and they're pitching, and then they get frustrated that people don't buy into it because they're solving the wrong problem. It's not, people aren't waking up to save the planet today, except people on this call, of course. So an example of that. So on the Renovate or Rebuild TV show, I know some of you have heard me talk about that. So we created a TV show from scratch with CSIRO using some of their behavioral science. And the show was designed, so the mission of the show was to create mass market demand for more sustainable housing in Australia, to get the average consumer to go, I want to live in one of those things. But the problem the show solves is, should I renovate or rebuild my home? Hence the name of the show. The reason people are watching the show is because they live in a house, it's a bit old and tired, they don't know whether to renovate it or knock it down. So that's the problem we're solving. The solution we give them is an entertaining TV show that tells them you need to build a sustainable home to solve your problem that you have. And so, if there's one thing, the one thing that we consistently see why good ideas don't see the light of day is because the innovators behind it are solving the wrong problem. And that's me done. Vlad?
Brilliant. And as you're talking, I just wonder, just if everyone just make a note, like I've been making a note, I made a note here about a company that was building a sustainable housing, and they came to us to help with funding. And it's the same thing, like, what is the problem that you're solving? Because no one in Victoria is going to take this prefab building, etc., because you've got all these other connections. So that's a really good point. I'd like if everyone can just take a note, start taking some notes, things that are coming to mind that we can bring up and share and talk through. I think this is going to be, at the end of these, presentations, we're going to have a very robust conversation. So thank you, James. Really appreciate it. Ahmed, there you are on my screen. How would you like to, you want to jump in and do an intro and talk about, your example?
Yes, certainly. Good morning, everyone. The things is me, James, and Sam's going to talk about all the reasons that maybe different projects are not seeing the light of a business, and there are some different things to discuss, but there are some common things that we all of us might go to and discuss it. So James mentioned a few things that I wanted to mention. Hopefully I'll leave some for Sam to finalize in his. One things I want to say is that, if you go to the reasons either in internet or the books that are discussing about startups or any new projects, there are a certain list of the reasons that statistically, are the failure points for most of projects like this. And you can find lots of different important things, and there is no real reason for the failure. It's relevant to the projects, the environments, the industry, but it could be from the funding issues to poor team to bad timing of a project, so having no customer, all that. But to me, one important or very important things or reason for failure is very much the things that James mentioned. So I'm not going to continue that, but just one adding points to it is I believe most of the projects that fail, wasting a lot of needless time, money, and effort in building something which the customers don't want. So they started with getting in love with their solution instead of working on the problem that their customer has, and being obsessed with that solution and spending all their time and money they have, and then at the end they found out no, that's no one really want that. That's really a very important thing, and there are lots of different methods there, like lean startup, lean methodology to tackle that, to look into it from the beginning with a very good methodological way, just to make sure that you can look into the right solution for those. But another point I want to mention is that because of lots of different things that any projects, even in the especially in the sustainability area, you need to do, finding your partners, the ecosystem and the problems that you want to solve, the business, the strategy, the marketing, and the product itself. It's important for the team, for the founders, to have a good view of everything that they need to do in a right time frame, because it simply can be very overwhelming process. So there is a lot of activities that you need to do. Most of the people in this area haven't done it before, even if they are serial entrepreneurs. Every new project is a bit different. So having a plan, having a sort of a map towards the whole process is really very important. We have actually, because of that, developed a map for the product developments in most of the projects that we're working, just to give some insights for any ones that going through that journey, just to be clear of all the activities that they need to do and plan for it and do it on time, because everyone has a limited resources on the team, on the funding, and everything else's. So knowing that helps them to have a better plan, as in what they need and when they need it as they go forward, so they don't get lost and lose the projects. One last thing I wanted to mention is another very important factor, which, because we do a lot of engineering and development works, we're dealing with, is commercialization. Like what James mentioned, I really get frustrated to lots of great ideas that I see developed in universities or R&D organizations, and they never really get into the market or become a business. And for most of those, not all, of course, the problem is the gap between the development of the IP and the technology and what needs to be at the manufacturing, at the production level. So not all of it are done with that requirements in mind. I came across a lot of projects that they have done in their, for example, universities, on some organizations, and as a technology in the lab, they look perfect. They're working and it's all good, but it cannot be simply transferred into any companies to manufacture or make those products. So having that in mind and having some help from the people that actually can do that transformations, and helping to provide documentation, look into the design, and working on how we can actually transform, and working and collaborating with the final manufacturing companies to be able to develop those in this, those products and technologies is a very, very important key. And I'll give you a very quick example of a product that we are dealing. It's a very simple one, but I think that could tell what happens. I was working with the clients that she wants to develop a yoga mat for outdoor. So it was a simple product, and they were thinking that the people can take it outside and put it on whatever surfaces, and then when you do your practice, you don't feel the roughness of the outdoor surfaces, and you can enjoy being in the nature and do all the practice. But they've done some development with another companies, and they come to us and say, this design we have, it looks great, but we can't actually manufacture it because we've told it's too expensive. And we looked and said, yep, really, that's really great design in terms of how it look like, but it's who you're going to sell it, because and how much you're going to sell it, because if you go to the market, the price range is in the market is in a certain range, but their product cost about 10 times of it, and of course they couldn't sell it. Sometimes it's important that you have that in mind when you're designing it, who you want to sell it for and how much you can sell it, who you can manufacture it, where you're going to manufacture it. Because if you want to manufacture, for example, in Australia, that would be a different story based on who you can work with, other than if you're going to manufacture, for example, in another country. So there's a lot of different important factors in here that if you have something to manufacture, for example, as an outcome of your company or startup, you need to consider that just to make sure that you can actually go to the later steps of commercialization and have a product that can see the light of market and business.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ahmed. And it's I think one of the things that that I put in my notes here that I want to bring up around that as well is that we see so many businesses when they start to go into that engineering and we're going to prefab, they go, that's it, I'm leaving my job and in 6 months I'm going to have a product, and they go hard, and in 6 months they run out of cash, and then they panic and go into a spiral. I would say that, in the last year, maybe out of 70 companies, maybe 50 were in that mix that I'd seen. It's just that, and when people come and they say, I've got enough money, I've got like 100 grand, I'm going to put this into it, I'm going to build this product, I'm going to go for it. And I want it to be ready in 6 months because otherwise I can't pay my bills. It's just,
exactly.
That time frame, that plan, I think that's a really important piece as well. I'm really glad you highlighted that, because that's such a killer.
It is.
Appreciate it. No, that's really great. All right, keep your notes together, everyone. So just hope everyone's putting down notes. Sandy, I wanted to welcome you as well. So we just got Sandy hanging from Ansto. Totally up her alley as well in the work that they do. We work with Ansto on a number of things right now, and Sandy leads the team across the business for doing all sorts of cool innovations. So thank you, welcome. Sam, can't wait to hear from you, my friend.
Yeah, it should be exciting, Vlad. I had to have a bit of a giggle at that last point, Hamed. I can totally relate to that. I didn't even have 6 months worth of pay when I jumped into Collabs to start it up. I had nothing. So we built this from the ground up.
He's patting on the shoulder, making you feel better.
He's just trying to make me feel better, still suffering from the trauma. But yeah, I just thought that was a really funny thing, because I mean, it's the one thing that if I could, in hindsight, tell myself, make sure you've got some cash aside and plan for the unplannable. But I guess the thing is, right, if you're that committed to trying to make change happen, you're probably not going to listen to anything anyone says. So that's exactly what happened with me. So I'm going to try and come at this from a bit of a different perspective. Like, obviously, a lot of the points that everyone's mentioned, I assume would be talked about beforehand. So I will do my best to come at it tangentially. So I guess one of the first and key points, which was kind of touched on, but maybe not explicitly directed, is putting yourself in another's shoes. So making sure that when you are thinking about what you're doing and what you're creating, is that you can actually take yourself out of your position into another person's shoes, and through using narrative storytelling, you can create a compelling, idea or prospect of what this product or service is that you're looking at creating, and how that adds value to their lives. And also from another perspective, it's also thinking, how can you create multi-stakeholder value across your entire supply chain, right? So how do I create value not just for the consumer? Oh, have I disappeared, or am I still here? I'm back.
No, you're perfect, man. Can hear you.
Okay, great. Everyone else froze. I'm like, of course. So how do you create that multi-stakeholder value across the entire chain? Because like when you look at key but don't species in an environment, they all create conditions conducive to life. They all try and help raise all boats, So when we look at animals and the way in which ecosystems work, it's really useful to, I guess, take that kind of mindset and try and apply naturalistic principles to the way we do business, rather than the mechanistic framework, which is what we're kind of very used to. Especially when you're trying to do, positive innovation work, it's really useful to have that, that complexity and systems mindset, and being able to understand what could go wrong, why, where you are, you know, and having a good map of your entire ecosystem and knowing all the players, and then also trying to game plan where things might go wrong. So for example, we were chatting with Matt. So Matt came up with a great idea for a company. Everything was going well, and then used a different technology to help, you know, bring that idea to market that was different to what he originally used. And then there was problems associated with the tech. And because it was such a heavy investment, it meant that everything didn't really work out the way they sort of wanted. So kind of trying to have that like first, second, third order effect thinking, understanding feedback loops, all of that sort of stuff, which is very prevalent in, I guess, the systems thinking and complexity space is a super useful thing to have a think about when you're trying to bring new innovations to market, because it is such a dynamic, complex, adaptive space. So it's really useful to keep that in mind. On top of that, I think another key point is collaboration is your competitive advantage. So when you're trying to go from 0 to 1 with all of these new innovative ideas, rather than trying to like take down someone or come at it from a competitive approach, try and look at ways in which you can weave yourselves into an ecosystem, or go for like, I guess, blue sky approaches where rather than competing for market share, you can create entirely new markets. And through that way, you can, I guess, open up the adjacent possible for others to come along with you. And what you essentially can do is, yeah, I guess, create a bigger piece of the pie for everyone, rather than trying to undercut, I guess, other people. So I think that's a really useful technique that we've seen quite a couple of organizations coming through the lab utilize. I think another sort of key point that I would say is, and this is coming from a guy in tech, in life science, but team is greater than technology. So that is something I wish everyone knew when starting out a business. Your idea is valuable, but it's not as valuable as you think. You know, there is probably about 100 or 1,000 other people who have the same sort of idea, or are curious about it. The idea is worth nothing. It's all about the process of implementation and how you actually bring this to life from ideation to actualization. So I think, and we've seen this quite a lot with some of the teams coming through our space, brilliant minds, absolutely brilliant minds. But the catch or the issue that they have is that they might not necessarily play well with others, or they might not be able to understand the qualitative stuff, the immaterial things. You know, they're really good with the tech, but they don't understand the relational dynamics of what it means to relate to your other stakeholders, and how what you say internally to a team member can impact how they function, and then how you outwardly face within the organization. So being in alignment between self and self, self and other, self and world is really important when you're trying to do positive impact. And again, with so much positive impact, it's like, make sure you look into it, because like problems are just solutions from the past, right? So make sure that when we're coming up with new solutions and we're looking at bringing things into the market, we're not just displacing another problem onto another area, which is going to be more complex and difficult to solve. Another key one, I think, and this is primarily with sort of biotech and less so social innovation, is scope and scale, right? So you have this great idea and you really want to implement it. And then, you know, your initial scope might be, we're going to break down plastic and we're going to turn it into a food for bacteria. And it's like, great. All right, cool. Someone knows that. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, we're also going to do this. You know, we're going to then take that and then suddenly you're creeping your scope until you're like, we're going to solve the world's problems with this, and we're the great, and suddenly it starts to become slightly less believable what you're trying to do with your product. So when you're looking at getting out there, obviously you want to have a portfolio of products eventually, but, you know, first of all, isolate, figure out one sort of product, get it in, nail it, and then you can diversify qualitatively and start to include other sort of things into the mix. And then scale is another one. So getting from benchtop to pilot to industrial scale with any sort of innovative project. If it's deep tech or something like that, look, it's going to take like 5 to 10 years at least, and factoring that in and acknowledging that. Obviously, some people can make this happen quicker depending on your ecosystem and I guess the place that you're operating from. But there are things that are qualitatively different at each of those levels, right? And they can't be reduced to the sum of their parts. So when you're going from, you know, a benchtop, okay, great, I've figured out how to make a biodegradable cling wrap, right? That's great, but can you do, like, 100,000 kilos of this in a week using the current technology that's already there? No. So like that plastic was a terrible example. I can actually give you a real world one here that we're facing. So we have 2 companies in the lab working on cellular agriculture. So that is essentially growing meat without the cow, right? So the tech's there, we can do it. But when we look to scale it, the catch is it's going to be a $200,000 burger right now if you want to turn that into something and buy it from McDonald's. Now, look, some people are super into designer fashion, might think designer food's a good way to go. But so in terms of the scale, there is certain things that are inhibitory, like once you try and bring that to market, and looking at ways in which you can like address that and see that as part of your roadmap is sort of super important when you're looking at trying to scale up positive impact. Then the last thing that I would say is less so much a reflection from, I guess, my personal experience with interacting with all of these sort of impact-oriented startups, and more so just a really useful framework, I think, that is quite a holistic. I've just shared it in the chat. So KTH Innovation, which I was lucky enough to go to, so one of our startups won the Global Change Awards for plastic. I got to go over there and meet KTH, and they talked through this innovation readiness level thing, which is I wish everyone knew about it. It's open, Creative Commons, anyone can use it. But what's really nice about this is it gives you a way of understanding and communicating internally and externally about your team's readiness level, your customer readiness level, your technology readiness level, your business model's readiness level, your IP's readiness level, your funding readiness level. And what you can have is this nice little spider diagram, which you can do each month. And it shows that, you know, your company is alive and it grows and changes in different directions as you're going along. But being able to communicate and articulate yourself clearly, especially to people who might not understand what you're doing because it is, you know, so new and novel, having a good framework like that, I think, is really essential, that holistically looks at the whole picture and allows you to communicate effectively internally and externally. Yeah, so that's kind of all of my points that I've come across.
There was a lot,
yeah.
Definitely lots of people to think about, and you know, I think that when you talk about the fabricated meat, what did you call it? Cellular meat? What's it called?
Well, they're going through a bit of an identity crisis at the moment because obviously traditional agriculture hates the fact that they're calling it cellular agriculture.
Agriculture, that's right.
Yeah, so
yes.
It's and synthetic meat just sounds way too dodgy. No one wants to eat that.
At the moment, is it only Singapore that's actually allowed for that to be served anywhere in the world? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Right?
That's a really good point. Actually, you just thank you. You brought up a point I totally forgot to mention. Regulations. So for example, hopefully I'm not going too much over time. So one of our other startups in the space, OzKelp. So they're creating Australia's first commercial kelp farm.
Yep. Okay.
They had to jump through 150 different pieces of legal regulations to be able to build their kelp farm. And that cost them so much money. And they had no idea beforehand. So it's like, again, like regulations, when you're creating a new market, and it's the same with cellular agriculture, it's like you have to be on that proactively and working with rather than working against, and not seeing them as an adversary. But how do we collaborate to make this work? So because the government's always going to be behind on regulation. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
And so part of this journey, and let's start to open it up as a bit of a panel conversation. And you know, if anyone's got questions, so just use your hand up in the tech piece, just so that way, I mean, it's a small group. If people want to just pop out and just sort of just say, hey, I want to say something, but you can feel free. There's a hand function down the bottom here somewhere where you can just raise your hand, and then I'll just call you out, and then you can just jump in. But I was going to say that regulation piece with the timing piece, and there's many of it as it works together. So, like to Hamid's point, where to one of the points, that timing is important and you need to have your roadmap. Well, part of that roadmap may be a 2-year regulation red tape journey that you will bleed and not be able to even feed your family because you've actually spent all your cash and then realize that you've still got another 2 years of red tape to get through. And this happens a lot, especially in that kind of the industries that are breaking ground, or those that have got a very stable, so where we looked at, I think I mentioned, prefabricated homes. That's a great idea when you're out regional maybe, or maybe where there isn't a lot of regulation, but when you come into cities, Sydney, Melbourne, whatever it might be, you've got a hell of a lot of res codes and so forth to deal with. So yeah, that's a very good point. Regulation and having some really good understanding of that, and when you're in the bleeding edge space, it's super important. Questions? So anybody want to sort of drop your thoughts? Feel free just to pop up and just speak up, or I'm happy to call you out. Everybody is on mute at the moment. Richard, comments? It's still on mute. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, look, I think that there's so much synergy between everything the three speakers said. James and Hamed and yourself, Sam. Like you're sort of saying similar things in maybe slightly different ways. But one of the takeouts which really resonates for me is about the importance of people, right? People rather than ideas and tech. Because if you can have the idea, but you can't if you haven't got the groups of people around that idea. And I think that's probably a segue to why this group is so important, because we've already got to that place, right? We don't have to convince anyone because we're all here because of the values that Anthony articulated earlier. So it's a matter of maybe of all those things that we're grappling with, what's got the biggest impact that we should work on. So yeah, as a group, within this group, I mean, I know, Sam, you've got your own business, Hamed, you've got your own business, but if we think of the problems of the world, how do we actually put the resources to make like huge impact? Anyway, I'll put that out there.
Julie, just looking at some of the work. Go ahead.
So, Julie, I think that's where this group really can potentially help. At the end of the day, we all know, we've got a large number of connections. There are people that know people that are investors. There are people that know that they're inventors. There are people that invent one thing or do something else. Our group, I think, is should be used for engineering the collaboration to make sure that these things actually come up and actually get used. I think companies doing it by themselves is really very, very difficult. So it's really getting the ideas here, and then almost putting those companies into a hot seat and figuring out how we can then help them with our connections to further grow and improve.
Well, actually, Richard, the reason why I was called you up before, because I thought that this topic would be really on point, because you do find the right people for the right companies. You've time again had most incredible introductions to the people in this call and the broader community. I thought it might be something that you've seen as well, where tech is great, but if you don't have the right team, it's a significant issue.
Team is incredibly important. I mean, there is as everybody knows, there's a war for talent out there. Every company is looking for great people to join them, and I've seen firsthand how getting a great leader in an organization can transform a company. Not even in years, sometimes it's months. There was an organization that I've done some work with who it took the chairman 2 years to figure out that the CEO was of this organization was toxic and the relationship was pretty bad. After the 2 years, finally the organization, the chairman called me in and said, right, we need a new CEO. 4 months later, a new CEO walked into the office. 3 months after that, I went back into the organization and the organization was transformed. Okay, they still had they still had a way to go to get them out of the problem, but you could feel the culture had changed. There suddenly became a sense of belief that you could actually get something done, and it was palpable. It was in the air. It's amazing what people can do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've worked on a couple of projects, some exciting things with Julie, and I'm really glad you raised that one too. Is that sometimes even the founders are just, you can't work with them. Right? It's just you may be the right person to execute. I think we talked about this. To be able to execute, I think it was mentioned a few times actually. But far out, if you can't work with the people, it just doesn't matter how amazing the idea is. And I think we've had a few of those really examples. Excellent. And so I want to mention with Sandy, you're here in the space of deep innovation. What do you see as the secret, to actually getting these ideas out into market?
Look, it's not something we're perfect at all. I think our challenge is we're really good at that fundamental research, that fundamental science, and the valley of death, I think, impacts us just as much as it does the university sectors and founders. It's sort of getting things further up the TRL is really, really challenging. So I think it's that fail fast kind of mentality and move on and iterate as quickly as possible is really key. So, but some really great discussion points, folks. Thank you. And apologies for my tardiness.
No, it's all good. Well,
I got here in the end. I had a few glitches this morning.
No, I really appreciate you joining because, I think one of the things when we talked about at the beginning where, it's very important to have the right stakeholder groups, part of that is government, research, universities and so forth. Plus, in order to make these things happen, there's a combination of things. There's no single group, and I think ANSTO, very similar to CSIRO, have these kind of challenges, which is something that James brought up early on, which is around that problem clarification. I think that is actually very interesting, especially when there's that bleeding edge tech. And Sam, you're talking about things as well. People coming to you with like the fabricated meat, whatever word we decide to use because it's still up in the air. But there's so many different technologies, right? Where the science is there and people want to build the science, but is the problem clarified? I would love to maybe just hear some thoughts on that, because I think that is such a valuable point, equally as important as team. Feel free, jump in. I know a lot of people on mute. Sandy, you wanted to comment on that?
I sort of was previously from the university sector, and before that was part of a heavy industry cluster. So I've sort of seen a lot of different perspectives on how to build that collaboration piece. I think it's something that we all still need to be really focused on. I thought Samuel had some really great comments on that. I missed some of the earlier speakers, but just building up that ecosystem for collaboration and looking for synergies with everybody else. And it's really not about competing. It's looking at how can we do some great things for the nation, really. So, yeah, so I'm really all about connecting. So I've probably stalked a few people already on LinkedIn.
No, that's cool. Julie, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say something about scientists and I suppose really high tech, propeller head type people, because sorry, those people that are in that category, but it's just that, or even engineers for that matter, right? It's communication is just not necessarily a strength. They're just in a bubble, and sorry, Sandy, but you're probably.
No, I'm not a scientist. My whole job is to do that.
That's
I'm an interpreter.
Yeah, good. We need interpreters, but so that those people might have the idea, but for God's sake, don't put them near investors because they just don't know what they're saying. So I have just had that experience firsthand, and yeah, I wish I could, you know, do that particular lesson again, because it was an absolute failure. we need a team, guys.
I'd love to put this to the panel, you know, Hamid, James, Sam, where, like, in the work that you do, because you work with entrepreneurs all the time, when you see the founder, the scientist, you know, the person that's leading, sometimes the visionary, you know, where you just go, this person is just can't put them in front of the investors yet. Also, or there needs to be, you know, some work done. Well, what's your thought? Just you three.
Well, I had a bit of a laugh there when Sandy, because I worked at CSIRO Senior, I know you missed introduction, so 13 years, and I'm not a scientist either. It's funny how people aren't scientists go, I'm not a scientist, don't put me in that category.
Not an engineer.
I also used to describe my job as being an interpreter, right? So I would interpret science speak into industry speak. So it's funny, we same description. Look, I think scientists can actually be really good at communicating their research if they're taught properly. Right? It's just not part of their training, right? The audiences they're often presenting to other scientists, and there's a very structured academic way that you present research results. And in the academic community, it's a critique, right? You're defending your position all the time, right? So you're not trying to bring people in. It's almost like, I'm going to put the shield up, and here's my data. Now you prove me wrong. And so they're just not equipped with the skills. So we actually run a program for PhDs, and we have a whole storytelling segment to teach them to, like, you know, and we tell them, like, your target audience is 12 years old. You need to be able to explain this to your mum, and your mum needs to be able to tell a 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old understands what you do for a living. And we teach them storytelling techniques, and it sort of goes to what Sam was saying before about using these narrative methods. I think scientists can be really good if they're equipped with the right tools and the right skills, and they're talking. They're all super smart, right? They'll learn quickly, but unless you put it in their face and say, I have no idea what you just told me about your research, but if you explain it to me this way, like, you've got the Uber of, I don't know, McDonald's meat, whatever it is, I get that straight away. Like, they just need the skills, right? And so I think, when we work with, and we do a lot of work with researchers, we focus on giving them the skills. And now there are some people that are just woeful at it, right? And you just have to be honest with them, saying, you can't stand up in front of an audience and talk. This person in your team who might be junior is really good at it. You need to enable them to do it. But for the most part, I think most scientists, you can get them to the point where they're competent communicators.
Got it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, right? Because, like, I mean, I'm a scientist, so I can still speak to people. But I think the big issue here comes from I think it's a failing of the educational system, to be honest. And we have this, like, socio-normative, I guess, things that force you into, if you're going to talk about anything, you have to be a PhD in this tiny little thing, right? We don't really encourage, like, diverse thinking across multiple disciplines, and we don't really encourage, I guess, the interest of the research into the qualitative and the quantitative, and how we can merge those two things together. So I agree. I think that a lot of the lacking is probably less so to do with the person and more so to do with the environmental conditions within which they are educated and then put through, like, the academic process. Like, you, as an academic, or when you study for uni, you're getting taught to be geared up to be a PhD student, to write papers and to do all this sort of stuff. You're not necessarily getting taught how this could have any commercial applicability. And I mean, it's starting to happen now at unis, but these things take time. Like, it's a total culture shift that we need to be facilitating and supporting, and there are a lot of things that are in the way and feedback loops, but I think we're getting there. And I think it's really important to that sort of work that you were saying you were doing, James. It's really important to be able to provide I guess, moments or experiences for people to participate in communicating ideas. As I said, that narrative storytelling stuff is super important. But I think that, everyone can be trained up to a level, but not everyone can do it amazingly. And it's like, well, if that's the case, maybe you should just be the CTO, and maybe you get a CEO who can talk and do all the socializing. There's always different ways to make it.
And I can imagine that with Hamed, you know, like when you get scientists and engineers coming to talk to you, they probably just totally geek out, right? It's great. Engineers talking with engineers, scientists talking, like this is like happy days, right? How do you deal? How do you help them
No,
that?
no, that's not true. You know, most of the problem we have is actually with the technical founders. You know, if you have someone with a marketing or with a business or entrepreneurial sort of background, that's much better projects. Usually it's, you know, there's much more success of it going ahead, because in our experience, and as, you know, Sam says, you know, not most, but the issue is when the technical people want to do the business, when they are not sort of taught to do it, and they are getting in love in what they think, what the solution is, and you know, what they call as a innovator's bias, and they think that's the best that you know, they can bring to the world, without looking into the actual problem and the actual market and the actual business. So yeah, most of the issues we have is actually with the sole technical founders, which they're only looking into their development of their solution, their product, without looking into who they are developing it for. And then sometimes it's actually too late when they found that you know, it's not going to be commercialized into market.
Fantastic.
Can I give two of the biggest examples in the world, just from a commercial perspective? McDonald's was basically a successful local business until Ray Kroc came in, though he's not a nice person. And the other one was Starbucks, because Starbucks, when it started in Seattle, just sold coffee beans. A marketing type person saw the opportunity, came in and turned it into a whole different thing, and actually gave the market what they wanted, not just the beans, the actual coffee. That's probably something for us all to look at. Who are we actually selling, and who's the right person to do, in my case, who's the right person to do the selling for me?
Would it be okay if I use that as a segue to one other really important piece that was raised? And let's come back to it. I don't want to derail, but I did want to add something there. So something that got raised was Sam talked about scope creep, and I put triple exclamation marks next to it, because technical founders, and Sandy, your team is you know, equally guilty of doing this. We're working with the geotechnical team. Amazing, huge solution answer, can do all sorts of cool things. Get on a big call with the Net Zero Stack group, and suddenly everyone's like, what, there's 50 things you can do, but we only wanted one thing. And so suddenly you blow your mind. You're like, wait, how do we commercialize this? And so suddenly we actually had to go, wait, what are we doing? And so it's funny how that happens. And I think, so part of this, like your Starbucks example, where you do something really good and then suddenly go, okay, how do we spread that? But what's that balancing act between that, getting something right, the base, and actually we can solve 50 problems with what we do? I would love the panel to jump in. But I think that's a really important, and yeah, point.
Yeah, I had a bit of a giggle when Sam said that as well. I actually got a sign up on my wall here that says, "Don't half-ass a whole lot of things, full-ass one thing and do it really well." And it's sort of, yeah, I 100% agree. Like you do something, you can always expand out, but yeah, we say that all the time. We're working with a startup right now. That's exactly that. They're doing some amazing work, but every time I talk to them, I want to do this. Let's just finish this first, and let's get this. Let's start selling lots of these. Let's get all the processes in place, and then we can move on to that one. Yeah, I think that's really important. And it comes back to that, you know, the point I guess around that problem space, right? What's the most pressing, painful problem you need to solve? The most important one, and just do that first. Same as, you know, Hamed was talking about, you know, the people wanting to build this product and build it all out that no one really wants it. You don't have to build a product oftentimes. Like you can do a pre-sale. There's a whole lot of other things you can do to validate that it's the right solution for the market you're targeting, to de-risk all of that, or build, you know, what I call the minimum lovable product. Like what's the one thing it has to do, and just build that first, and then you can add all the other features later. So I think that's really important for people to understand. Otherwise, you end up just diffusing your limited resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy for an innovative, creative person to do that, right? To just like jump in and like, oh, I'm just going to keep doing this, and running through a whole bunch of different things. So yeah, it is interesting watching how that sort of unfolds and trying to find ways to.
You might be able to hear Sam in the background.
Sorry, we're dual mediating here.
I think it's interesting, Hamid. I'd love to get your point, because I think that actually strangely, like these points, they link together. There is no, you can't silo it. I think that's what's really starting to come out. We cannot silo the success factor, or there's a number of things that must happen, and they must happen either simultaneously or around the same time. Hamid, what's your take on the scope creep? And then I'll bring in the one other aspect.
Certainly, that's goes back to one point that I mentioned about having a roadmap about the developments, because as you mentioned, there are a lot of different things that you need to do, and sometimes you need to do something before another, and it's important for you to know it and have a plan, because we all have a limited resources, limited team, time, funding, and lots of others, like the regulations that we mentioned. Some of the things that we need to do, we need to have a plan for it, so then we know how we need to go ahead with the whole process. And it can be quite overwhelming, and most of it you don't know yourself. You need to get some help. You need to get working with a mentor, with an advisor, with different organizations that can help you with that process. But it's important for the group or the team to know it, to have a plan, and know how they need to move ahead with all the activities that they need to do with the developments of the business.
No, that's exactly right. So when we look at that, and so I've actually highlighted in my notes like 4 areas that we seem to be coming back to, and roles. I was going to actually point to you because you're involved in a lot. We had an amazing conversation with roles a few weeks back, and I think this might be something that you might be able to comment on as well. So of the 4 things that I've identified just in my notes that we keep covering, the problem clarification, just think like, what is it that we're trying to solve? What is that thing, and what is that thing that's really valuable? Sometimes we might be trying to solve global greenhouse gases, but we're going to build out this alternative meats to solve that. So maybe what can we sell? Maybe I'm not sure which one we're going to be able to sell easier. And I think that was that glass was a really good example, James. The time frame realism, I've kind of reworded that a little bit, Hamid, where you're talking about the timelines. It's almost like this timeline realism, which captures a bunch of things around knowing that you might be all in, but there may be red tape, there may be, you're going to run out of cash. It's a whole range of things will happen, and knowing what needs to happen from start to finish, and having some of this realism about how long things really take and what needs to happen with this roadmap. We hit the teams piece. So team is even more valuable than tech, and across the board, nonstop, we keep seeing these examples. And scope creep, do something great before doing everything, but also in your messaging. And I think that's something that we've seen, and I've worked with many of you here, where different opportunities and different things, where having that scope creep and just having clear on the single message is important. Rose, I was going to ask you, have you got something you want to maybe share around this as well, because you do some incredible work.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, that's a few questions there. If I could talk about how Kevin and I work together, I'm kind of like the techie, but Kevin is I pretend to be the techie. But I think we have a very simple model. I talk to businesses about their waste, and they're throwing away money. But by highlighting what they do with the waste, we're able to say, hey, did you know this? Did you know that? So we do focus on one issue, one problem area, and we look for solutions for that. But on a regular basis, we talk about different aspects of the business that we might also be able to tackle. Does that answer your question?
It does, because the reason why I wanted to bring it up was what I really liked when we met with Kevin the first time. It was around that, how do you reduce costs in business? But when we met with roles, we suddenly realized that sometimes when the message, when you look at an organization that's trying to solve a problem, like with a net zero stack, and Jennifer and James can attest, we're looking at a huge environmental problem like it might be an ash dam. But what is the thing, what is the actual problem for the company that has that? You know, we may see it as like, hey, that's a huge environmental problem, there's leaching, it's a disaster, but for them it's actually a stranded asset that they want to make some money out of that thing, you know, potentially. So those sort of conversations is what I really liked with the way that Rolls approached it when we were talking about that, and how do you measure the economics of that. And actually it's strange, yeah, and in part, Jennifer, who's just joined, I don't know, Jennifer, if your mic is working, I was going to say, you know, you've commercialized a hell of a lot of some bleeding edge technologies. And so I'll see if Jennifer comes off mute or not. And there's always this issue of being able to, you know, solve the problem, but also, you know, create that incredible value, but getting the messaging right, you know, bringing a whole range of those things together on a large scale. Jen, are you there? Are you able to comment?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just walking back from my appointment. I'm sorry I had to leave. My appointment called and said, well, I'm here now. Anyway, so that's the reality of being a startup person, right? It's not, you're pulled in all kinds of different directions. Yes, so a couple of points that you mentioned, I really think resonate with me. Having a clear message. I have a very complicated, I commercialize tech, so it's a very complicated thing, right? So it's very difficult for me to be simplify it, right? So that's the challenge that I have, is how do I make my message, which I'm kind of very comfortable with, simple for somebody else. And so I'm actually looking for someone to help me simplify that message because
have you James Mcgregor?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm looking to work with James, certainly. But the whole idea is that it's very hard to see things that are complex in your own work, right? So that's the first part. But then the other part is how complicated actual commercialization is. So if you think of the valley of death, right? So you've got on one side, you've got the investor, and on the other side, you've got the innovator. So, but in between, the bridge part of it is all these things: the offtake agreement, the feedstock, how does it work, what's the transport, what's all of the implementation details. And unfortunately, that takes a lot of connections, and the more complicated. So I only work in deep tech, so it's hard to find lots of connections who have a chemical plant or whatever. So that's why I actually started Nakudu as a way to meet all those deep tech innovators across the world. So, and it's precisely because of how complicated the problem was.
No, I appreciate it, Jen. That's exactly right. And Ton has also joined us, and Ton has worked in engineering companies, and he's had some incredible innovation roles. But I know he's on mute because it's noisy in his background, so he's quietly listening. But it's funny how in the engineering team, so Ton, if you can take your mute off, please do. Feel free to join in. If not, that's okay. In the engineering space, you know, engineers also, you know, love to, you know, get into the solving and not always the why, you know. And so we've worked in a whole range of international engineering companies, and we work with them now. And it's funny how sometimes the purpose, like what is the thing that we're actually trying to solve, and how's that actually going to work, is going to make a difference. Ton, I see you've taken your mic off. Are you able to comment?
I was going to say, yeah, I have lots of good engineers that know how to solve all the world's problems. Yes. Lots of good. But yeah, how to commercialize that and how to find an audience for some of the problems they want to solve is, yeah, often the challenge. I like what Steve Jobs always said: lead with experience, not with problems and problems to solve. It's just like, what are you creating for them?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I guess I just wanted to touch base on Robin. I saw you in the comments. So we're going to wrap this up in just a few minutes, but I want to make sure that we do the rounds. Robin, you know, you work in deep tech, and you say that you don't work with the tech founders, you work with the others. Is that right? Did I read that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. So for much the same reasons Ahmed and Sam said, it's yeah, they're focused on who the customer is, and we look for people who have lived the experience already
because they're the ones that can tell the tech team what needs to happen, because they've walked a mile in the shoes. My team, they've never, done any of the roles that they've built software for. So we look for those particular industry experts, because we can translate for them, which seems to be a common theme today.
Yeah, it is a challenge. It is a challenge, especially when the founders who are very, have got a vision. I was going to just give an example when I can't remember who mentioned it in the conversation before around. Sometimes the big companies also buy the tech and shut it down, and it's interesting too, because I think I gave, when we had a breakout with Kevin and Jen, I was talking about an example where, we were trying to innovate something to disrupt the market, and we were being disrupted by the time we got to market. It was just like, we just had to give up in the end. It was like, this is just crazy. But we looked at, there's a tech called Bump, and if you look it up online, there's some things written about Google purchasing them. And I think in the end, Facebook bought them and shut them. Because first Apple came out with AirDrop, and Bump was a technology. You have one phone, you tap another phone, and you exchange information, your business cards, photos, whatever it might be. So that Bump, it was back in 2013. So we're looking at almost 10 years ago, and they had 10,000 people signed up to their platform at one point. And I think it was when Facebook bought them. So if I've got some of the information wrong, because don't quote me 100%, but they got bought and shut down, and suddenly you have 10,000 developers approximately all over the world going, hold on, we were using this, is great, not interested in this thing. Robin, you're shaking your head. Have you heard of them before? Did you hear about Bump?
Yeah, I used it.
You used it?
Yeah.
Until it got shut down?
Yeah, it just disappeared. No, there's been a lot like that.
And sometimes the disruptor is, going to get disrupted as well. That does actually happen. Colleen, you've been sitting really quietly. Did you want to comment on anything? And then I'll go to Kevin, and then we may just wrap up this session and take any last questions. So feel free. Colleen, anything from you? Any last comments?
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. I actually met everyone through James. Had posted on LinkedIn impactpreneur traits, and I hit every single one, and I went, I need to meet your group, because this is kind of where I need to be. So I am 35 years technology with IBM Air Canada, award-winning in automation and design. So I was very concerned about the #2 global problem, which is the global plastic waste crisis. And an expert in troubleshooting and lean architecture, I reviewed the issue and have redesigned. So Save Our Planet Refillery, the root cause to global waste is distribution. It's not packaging. So I redesigned a system, a high volume dispensing system. So Save Our Planet Refillery is transforming distribution with new infrastructure and technology to remove packaging. Removing packaging increases profits for all industries. And so it reduces product costs and operating costs 20% each, waste 100%, and make 1 million tons of carbon emissions annually, because we reduce shipping volumes by 70% by removing packaging. And so what I'm doing is literally taking the filling of containers away from the supplier and enabling consumers with a new consumer purchase power with their designed containers, whether they be glass, plastic, stainless steel, anything from 500 mil up to 20 liters, because that's the maximum anyone can carry without ruining their backs. And so I designed the system for Walmart, and then realizing that it's actually capable of being implemented in all industries, airports, hospitals, universities, military. Everyone has to remove the packaging. They truly have no idea. The beauty of the system is it solves a $1 trillion annual problem. The waste industry is making $863 billion. Our system has.
You started at that. What is the problem? And looked at the problem earlier. Kind of like what that conversation, with the panel early on was to get to the what's really the thing that needs to be solved and what is going to be the way to solve it. That's sort of this. It's a really fantastic example.
Thank you. I'm a master at root cause analysis, and it was truly looking at, changing packaging does not reduce waste. It doesn't change the costs. It doesn't solve anything. In other words, it may melt, but it's not reducing many issues we are facing. When you solve more than one issue, you are the true solution to what's going on in this world. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a disruptor. I never go with status quo, ever.
Oh, you're gonna love hanging out with this team. I can tell you that. That's for sure. No wonder you reached out to James. James is, we don't call him a disruptor. We call him troublemaker, actually, amongst just the friends. But that's okay.
I've got two words. Welcome, Colleen. Disruptor. Not willing to go with status quo. Welcome.
Well, you've definitely found a tribe that you're going to fit nicely into. Thanks, Colleen, so much for joining, especially last minute like that. James, thanks for inviting Colleen. Kevin, any last words?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Vlad. So everything everyone's talked today about in terms of customer problem, scaling, cash, timing, roadmap, complexity. I don't see there's any real difference between those problems for a project or a startup in the sustainable sense. I think that's just a general issue across all startups, regardless of their theme. And when I think about us as a group, the comment around team over tech completely resonates. And then I think Richard was sort of called out for a guy that brings the right people together. So I see the challenge of this group, and I see also commonalities with the G&T Hub at Symphony 7. And also the Impact Collective. I think the challenge for this group is, are we going to be master connectors and master collaborators? If the answer is yes to those two things, then I think we can do great things together.
Thanks, Kevin. And from the moment that we had met, it was really clear that was at the core, that collaboration and support, because the business that you run, like, you guys back yourselves on success, not a lot of the upfront stuff that many others who do talk a big game. That's why really appreciate you participating with us here. So what I would like to do is I will just pass back to the panel for last comments, and then we're going to do a quick breakout with a question for you to share, and then we'll come back. So Hamid, I'm just going to go on my screen first. Hamid, any last comments?
No, not really. I think we had a great conversations and covered a lot of very important points here. I think I also only wants to emphasize on collaboration. I think that's the main important things, especially for the new projects. They all need collaboration.
Especially if we bring in some of these things that we've pulled out as being critical to success to get things out. I think that's going to be a really it's going to drive success. James?
I want to channel a little bit of Steve Jobs, because someone brought up Steve Jobs earlier, saying the ones that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. So I just wanted to throw that one into the mix. But also what Kevin just said at the end there, that really resonated with me. And I mean, let's find something to work on. I think we can talk about all the problems of the world till we're blue in the face, and we're all aware of it. That's not going to get us anywhere. Let's find an actual tangible thing to work on together, and let's put all these great skills and principles we talked about today into practice and get something out in the world.
So I think you'll be surprised at some things that will be happening here with the hub and support with the Symphony 7 team. There are some things coming up over the next few weeks, a couple of months, that I think people are going to be able to just say, hey, I want to get involved and participate. There's some big things happening. So thanks for putting it out there, James. Sam, last comments?
Yeah, I think I love what Kevin said, and I think that absolutely. I think everything we're talking about now doesn't matter what sort of startup you are, right? It's like you actually won't be able to function in society if you're not generating value, like we were talking about, that is a positive impact going forwards into the future. Like the extractive to generative thing, we can't be doing that anymore. It's literally, you're going to hit a wall as an organization if that's all you do. Like there's too much bubbling up in the collective unconscious. The thing that I think I'd sort of take away from this, or what I found was so lovely to hear, Colleen, was I guess that reference to like, we need to be looking at the generator functions of our problems and then creating solutions that address those. And that's something that I think with this amazing group here that we've got, there are so many bright minds and thinkers, and I guess it is coming together around projects that are happening, you know, whether that's startups that I know in our ecosystem or startups that we've been introducing to Symphony 7 over the next couple of months as well. There's quite a few organizations that are doing exactly what we're talking about, that we'll be getting a chance to actually get to communicate with and hang out with soon, and discuss ways in which we can sort of collaborate and support them. I mean, you know, my lab's not called CoLabs for no reason. Yeah, I think collaboration.
Oh, it's got you on mute there. No, thanks so much. That's really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the panel members for driving this. We had a fantastic panel discussion. Really, thank you so much to the panel members, Hamad, Sam, James. It was great to, you know, for you to lead the conversations, and I think we've had some fantastic ones, and we're going to look forward to sharing that. I just want to wrap up, pass over to Maurice, just talk about what we've got coming up, and then bring our session to a close.
Yeah, awesome. Well, to me, just a reflection, something that came to mind is that the only way through the valley of death is together. That's what I really took out from today. And just want to share quickly, we've got next month's session organized already. We're going to have Ian Jones from CAS coming in to talk a little bit about the carbon economy. And essentially, there's a new sheriff coming to town, and that's going to have some big impact on businesses and pretty much anyone doing anything in industry, and how we can prepare for that and what that might mean. That's coming up next month. I'm just going to drop the link into the chat and just select the September 30th on checkout. And we'll also do an update and summary of what came out of today for everyone next month at the beginning as a Hub update.